The 1953 North Sea flood was a major flood caused by a heavy storm that occurred on the night of Saturday, the 31st of January 1953 and morning of Sunday, the 1st of February 1953. The floods struck the Netherlands, Belgium, England and Scotland. A combination of a high spring tide and a severe European windstorm over the North Sea caused a storm tide. The combination of wind, high tide, and low pressure led to a water level of more than 5.6 meters above mean sea level in some locations. The flood and waves overwhelmed sea defenses and caused extensive flooding. The Netherlands, a country with 20% of its territory below mean sea level and 50% less than 1 meter above sea level and which relies heavily on sea defenses, was worst affected, recording 1,836 deaths and widespread property damage. Most of the casualties occurred in the southern province of Zeeland. In England, 307 people were killed in the counties of Lincolnshire, Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex. 19 were killed in Scotland. 28 people were killed in West Flanders, Belgium. Another more than 230 deaths occurred on watercraft along northern European coasts as well as on ships in deeper waters of the North Sea. The ferry MV Princess Victoria was lost at sea in the North Channel east of Belfast with 133 fatalities, and many fishing trawlers sank. Realizing that such infrequent events could recur, the Netherlands particularly, and the United Kingdom, carried out major studies on strengthening of coastal defences. The Netherlands developed the Delta Works, an extensive system of dams and storm surge barriers. The UK constructed storm surge barriers on the River Thames below London and on the River Hull where it meets the Humber estuary. Netherlands. On the night of the 31st of January, the 1st of February 1953, many dikes in the provinces of Zeeland, South Holland and North Brabant proved unable to resist the combination of spring tide and a northwesterly storm. On both the islands and the mainland, large areas of country were flooded. Many people still commemorate the dead on the 1st of February. Warnings at the time of the flood. None of the local radio stations broadcast at night, and many of the smaller weather stations operated only during the day. As a result, the warnings of the KNMI did not penetrate the flood-threatened area in time. People were unable to prepare for the impending flood. As the disaster struck on a Saturday night, many government and emergency offices in the affected area were not staffed, as telephone and telegraph networks were disrupted by flood damage. Within hours, amateur radio operators went into the affected areas with their equipment to form a voluntary emergency radio network. These well-organized radio amateurs worked tirelessly, providing radio communications for 10 days and nights, and were the only people able to maintain contact from affected areas with the outside world. Resulting damage. Large parts of South Holland, Zeeland and North Brabant were inundated. In North Holland only one polder was flooded. The most extensive flooding occurred on the islands of Schouwen-Duiveland, Tholen, Sint-Philipsland, Gurry-over-Vlakkie, the Hoogsewaard, Voorn-Putten and Alblassewaard. Parts of the islands of Zuid-Beveland, Noord-Beveland, IJsselmeer, Pernis, Rozenburg, Walcheren and Landveen-Altena were flooded, as well as parts of the areas around Willemstad, Nieuw-Vossemeer and parts of Zeeuws-Vlaanderen. The highest death tolls were recorded on the islands of Schouwen-Duiveland and Gurry-over-Vlakkie. Afterward, the government formed the Delta Commission to study the causes and effects of the floods. They estimated that flooding killed 1,835 people, and forced the emergency evacuation of 70,000 more. Floods covered 9% of Dutch farmland, and sea water flooded 1,365 square kilometers of land. An estimated 30,000 animals drowned, and 47,300 buildings were damaged, of which 10,000 were destroyed. Total damage is estimated at 1 billion Dutch guilders. Near flooding of other parts, the Schielands-Hodges dike along the River Hollands-IJssel was all that protected 3 million people in the provinces of South and North Holland from flooding. A section of this dike, known as the Granendijk, was not reinforced with stone revetments. The water level was just below the crest and the seaside slope was weak. Volunteers worked to reinforce this stretch, but the Granendijk began to collapse under the pressure around 5:30 a.m. on the 1st of February. Seawater flooded into the deep polder. In desperation, the mayor of Nieuwerkerk commandeered the river ship De Twee Gebroeders and ordered the owner to plug the hole in the dike by navigating the ship into it. Fearing that the ship might break through into the polder, Captain Arie Green took a rowboat with him. The mayor's plan was successful, as the ship was lodged firmly into the dike, reinforcing it against failure and saving many lives. The Afsluitdijk across the entrance of the Zuiderzee was said to have paid for its construction cost in that one night, by preventing destructive flooding around the Zuiderzee. Reaction: several neighboring countries sent soldiers to assist in searching for bodies and rescuing people. The U.S. Army sent helicopters from Germany to rescue people from rooftops. Queen Juliana and Princess Beatrix visited the flooded area only a few days after. A large aid program came on apace, supported by the radio. A national donation program was started and there was a large amount of international aid. The Red Cross was overwhelmed by contributions and decided to send some of the funds to assist residents of third world countries. Politically, the disaster prompted discussions in the Netherlands concerning the protection and strengthening of the dikes. As a result, the Delta Works were authorized, an elaborate project to enable emergency closing of the mouths of most estuaries, to prevent flood surges upriver. United Kingdom. The North Sea flood of 1953 was one of the most devastating natural disasters ever recorded in the United Kingdom. Over 1,600 kilometers of coastline was damaged, and sea walls were breached, inundating 1,000 square kilometers. Flooding forced 30,000 people to be evacuated from their homes, and 24,000 properties were seriously damaged, probably the most devastating storm to affect Scotland over the last 500 years. The surge crossed between the Orkney and Shetland Isles. The storm generated coastal and inland hazards, including flooding, erosion, destruction to coastal defences, and widespread wind damage. The storm's damage occurred throughout Scotland, with 19 fatalities reported. The fishing village of Crovey, built on a narrow strip of land along the Moray Firth coast, was abandoned by many of its inhabitants as entire structures were swept into the sea. The surge raced down the east coast into the southern North Sea, where it was exaggerated by the shallower waters. In Lincolnshire, flooding occurred from Marblethorpe to Skegness, reaching as far as 2 miles inland. In individual incidents, 38 died at Felixstowe in Suffolk when wooden prefabricated homes in the West End area of the town were flooded. In Essex, Camvey Island was inundated, with the loss of 58 lives. Another 37 died when the seafront village of Jaywick near Clacton was flooded. Race Lemming, a U.S. airman, was awarded the George Medal for his bravery in rescuing 27 people in the South Beach area of Hunstanton. In East London, water poured from the Royal Docks into Silvertown, where it drained into the sewers but flooded back out again in Canning Town and Tidal Basin. William Haywood, a night watchman at William Ritchie & Son, died of exposure to gas from a damaged pipe. He was the only fatality. Almost 200 people were made temporarily homeless and took refuge at Canning Town Public Hall. The total death toll on land in the UK is estimated at 307. The total death toll at sea for the UK, including the MV Princess Victoria, is estimated at 224. Total damages were estimated to be £50 million. Belgium. The coastal defence of Flanders was severely damaged. Near Ostend, Knocker and Antwerp, heavy damage was done to the sea defence with local breaches. 28 people died, including noted Belgian musician Robert Dubois. Responses. After the 1953 flood, governments realized that similar infrequent, but devastating events were possible in the future. In the Netherlands, the government conceived and constructed an ambitious flood defense system beginning in the 1960s. Called the Delta Works, it is designed to protect the estuaries of the rivers Rhine, Meuse and Scheldt. The system was completed in 1998, with completion of the storm surge barrier Maaslankering in the Nieuwe Waterweg, near Rotterdam. In the UK, the Permanent Secretary to the Home Office, Sir Frank Newsom, coordinated the immediate efforts to defend homes, save lives and recover after the floods. After flooding, the government made major investments in new sea defences. The Thames Barrier programme was started to secure central London against a future storm surge. The barrier was officially opened on 8 May 1984. Studies in the 1990s re-examined the flood. Researchers studied how it was reported and interviewed hundreds of survivors, many of whom had never openly talked about their experiences before. The conclusions reached were that some of the stories of heroism during the flood were exaggerated. Also, that afterwards the Dutch did not have serious discussions of why this preventable disaster occurred, and as a nation tended to ignore its social and psychological impacts. Commemoration. In 2013, a service was held at Chelmsford Cathedral to mark the 60th anniversary of the Great Flood, attended by Anne, Princess Royal. Acts of remembrance were also held in Lincolnshire, Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex. Books, films and music. The composition Requiem Aeternam 1953 by Douwe Isengard was written as a commemoration of the flood. The Dutch Public Broadcasting Foundation has made numerous documentaries about the North Sea flood. 2 have been adapted as English versions. The Greatest Storm of 1953, The Year of the Beast. BBC Time Watch made a documentary about the North Sea flood of 1953, called The Greatest Storm. An episode of the ITV series Savage Planet featured the flood. In January 2008, the Brighton-based band British Sea Power released their third album, entitled Do You Like Rock Music, which includes the song Camvie Island, referring to the floods. The 1953 floods were mentioned in detail in the drama film Flood. In 2009, a Dutch action drama titled De Storm was released. The book The Little Ark by Jan de Hartog, published in 1953, depicted the flood. It was adapted as a film by the same name in 1972. The short story, The Netherlands Lives with Water, by Jim Shepard, contains a passage describing the event. The 1976 book Oosterschelde, Windkracht 10, by Jan Terlouw is the story of the flood in Zeeland, Netherlands. The first part describes the storm, while the second part describes the later conflicts about constructing the Delta Works. The 2012 non-fiction book The Sugar Girls, by Duncan Barrett and Nuala Calvi, describes the effects of the flood in East London, and on workers at Tate and Lyle's East End factories. John Wyndham's apocalyptic science fiction novel The Kraken Wakes includes a section in which the whole of the Netherlands is flooded due to aliens melting the polar ice caps. The flood is mentioned in the movie Bride Flight as one of the reasons some were emigrating to New Zealand. The flood is mentioned in Susan Vreeland's novel Girl in Hyacinth Blue, ch. 5, Morningschina. The 2004 CD, 1953, by the dark ambient musical project, The Laura Collective, is an instrumental story, hauntingly and yet beautifully told in 7 chapters. The story of the flood is musically presented from the victim's point of view. The fear, stress and despair of such a devastating natural disaster is further enforced with the occasional addition of minimalist poetry in the form of spoken word. Borrowed from the artist's website, the premise is told here. Sophisticated in sound, evolution and intensity, every chapter of this story will grab your attention and keep you on the edge of your seat. An honest, sad and solemn auditory treat. The 1953 North Sea flood and its effect upon the coastal town of Lowestoft, UK, is the subject matter of a painting by British artist Mark Burrell.